Hi everybody, this is Danielle Dinkelman, and you might know me from our plant-based potlucks, or you might know me through my health and wellness coaching business, but I had the opportunity of being at the Plant-Based Utah Symposium this last week. It was the third annual symposium that they've had. It was up in Park City, Utah on November 23rd. This is 2019, so at the time of this video, it was just a few days ago, so I wanted to hop on here and share with you kind of my takeaways, my aha moments, some of the things that impressed me the most about the symposium. So basically, I'm going to share the highlights with you. This might be one video, it might be three, I don't know. We'll see how much information gets launched into this, but I just wanted to take the opportunity to share it with you because I know many of you weren't able to attend and you're wondering, was there anything that I missed? Was there anything that I could have gleaned from that? So I highly encourage you to attend next year. Plan on it. It's typically in the fall every year. So you can go to plantbasedutah.org to stay informed there. I'm actually on the advisory board for this organization. I really believe in their mission, which is to educate the public and basically advocate for a whole food, plant-based approach to nutrition, which if you know me, you know that I am very much aligned with that. So we're just gonna dive in, okay? And forgive me, I'm gonna be looking down at my notes quite a bit, but of course there's no way that I could give you everything that I learned or everything that was talked about. For my background, I have studied plant-based nutrition for 3 years now, and it's really exciting for me to come to a place like this symposium and feel like I didn't just hear stuff that I've already heard. There really were some new things that I took away. So I'm really just going to share those with you. If you're still a beginner or new to learning about whole food plant-based nutrition, I highly encourage you to continue that research. Reach out to me if you're looking for, where you could get started. I'd be happy to help you with that. But to get started, so first I'll talk about Dr. Olsen's talk and Dr. Rosenberg's. I wasn't able to catch all of Dr. Rosenberg, but basically these are the two founders of Plant-Based Utah. They are both orthopedic surgeons and fully committed to whole food plant-based nutrition. But what I really appreciated in Dr. Olsen's presentation was it was just a really good overview of why whole food plant-based. Why is it even relevant? But one of the new things that he shared that I had not heard yet was that just in 2018 there was an article in the JAMA medical journal that diet has overtaken smoking as the #1 risk factor for premature death in the United States. Isn't that incredible? So for years and years it's always been smoking was the #1 risk factor for premature death, but now it is diet. Okay, so I mean we know that diet is strongly correlated with health and lifespan. So that was pretty telling that it is getting so out of control that it is now #1. So if you weren't paying attention to diet before, I hope you are now, because what we eat is so important. Okay, I'm gonna try to not lace everything with my opinion, so forgive me. I'll try to just deliver the facts. I'll try to act like more like a journalist, an honest journalist. All right, so here we go. The other highlight that I pulled from Dr. Olsen's address was he talked about heart disease, how it is our #1 killer, and I talk about this all the time in the presentations that I give, and but the numbers that he shared really do put it into perspective that 50,000 people a day die of heart disease. 50,000 people a day globally. That's pretty staggering. And again, that should get our attention, that if this whole food plant-based nutrition touts to be able to reverse heart disease, which it does. In fact, Dr. Olsen highlighted that of all of the other diets out there, all of the other approaches to nutrition, he highlighted the ketogenic diet especially. this is the only tested diet that has been shown to reverse chronic disease. So that's pretty compelling as well. Speaking of ketogenic diet, I actually talked to Dr. Olsen after his presentation, and I shook his hand and I said, thank you for talking about the keto diet, because it is such a hot topic right now, and we want answers, right? We want to know, and we want to know for ourselves, is this really a good idea? If it's not a good idea, why? And how can we navigate that choice, not only for ourselves, but maybe for those that are close to us? So he shared some studies, and I believe it was something from, I think I wrote down the Harvard School of Public Health, that they reviewed the research on the ketogenic diet and basically concluded that this diet should not be recommended because it did increase multiple risk factors for cardiovascular disease and probably cancer as well. Don't quote me on that one. Like I said, guys, I didn't take exact notes, but I'm just giving you the highlights here. It was very compelling that the evidence has shown that it's not a good thing. It can, now they did admit that it can be effective for short-term weight loss, but it should not be recommended because of its long-term effects as you continue with it. So that's the highlight there. Okay, let me flip over to my notes for Dr. Rosenberg. Dr. Rosenberg is a veteran. He's now retired from the operating room, but he is a veteran in the in this space of understanding plant-based nutrition, but also practicing as an orthopedic surgeon. He had a lot of wisdom to share. But one of the main things that caught my attention of something that he shared, and that I think all of us need to be aware of, especially those of us that live in Utah, is that Utah is the #1 sugar consuming state in our country. Okay, we are the winners for consuming the most sugar. So, you know, most of you that are listening to this probably are in Utah, because that's where I am at. Something to think about, right? So we definitely want to take a look at our sugar intake. All right, cool. So let me go now. Yeah, I think we can just do this in one video, you guys. I'm gonna go now to my notes from Dr. Shipra Bansal. She is an MD and she lives in Arizona. She is practicing family medicine there, but she shared kind of her journey and her story of getting into medical school and moving through that. As she entered medical school, she inherently felt and believed that nutrition would play an important role in helping patients become healthier, right? That was kind of intuitive to her, but as she shared her story, she shared that the more she got into the training and moved through her residencies and whatnot, the more nutrition started to take a back seat for her, as she said it. And I really appreciated her sharing her story, because it was great to kind of hear that from a firsthand account of how that felt, to kind of know that intuitively, but then have it basically trained out of you that no, we really don't, like, nutrition doesn't matter. And so that was basically how she was practicing normal medicine, and many of us that have looked into and started learning about plant-based nutrition, we realize quickly, especially if you've watched documentaries like Forks Over Knives and Eating You Alive, you recognize that most, if not all, medical training in our country is extremely lopsided to medicine and not so much a study of nutrition. That it's just not taught, and that's a lesson to us, right? That when we go to a doctor looking for advice, we can't expect them to bring up the fact, most of the time, we can't expect them to bring up the fact that, oh, if you cleaned up your diet, or if you tried this or tried that, you might see these symptoms go away, or you might see this improve, or you know the rest of the story if you've been looking into this for some time. So it was neat. It was neat to hear her story about that. So she shared a little bit of how she was introduced to plant-based nutrition, and it's totally escaping me now of what her story was, so forgive me. But the remainder of her talk was that basically she did eventually come around and realize that yes, you can reverse diabetes, you can prevent and reverse heart disease. There are really powerful things happening when you help your patients move to a more whole food plant-based approach. And she now practices that basically in her family medicine practice down there in Arizona, which I have so much love and respect for her, that she is a pioneer in that space. And I love hearing that there are more and more medical doctors moving in that direction and having that awakening and that realization that nutrition really can play a huge role in healing their patients. So, all right, so the rest of her talk was really great. It was structured as kind of like a myth or fact, and she had quite a few little statements that she would put up, and she would ask us in the audience if we thought that that was a myth or if we thought that was true, if it was a fact. And I gotta say, like, I think I got a pretty high mark on that true or false test. I was privy to most of what she shared, so I will just kind of go over the ones that I thought really made an impact, or she really kind of debunked the root cause of the myths. So maybe you'll find this helpful. So the first one that I wrote down in my notes was she talked about this idea that soy can contribute to cancer, and that it can, in fact, have a feminizing effect on men that consume soy. And of course, that is a very widespread belief, and it is in fact a myth somewhat. I really had so much respect for her, how she approached this, because she did share that when there was something out there that caused that myth to come to be, she dove into that kernel of truth and showed why it's not actually the full-blown thing that we think it is. So as she talked about soy, she went into so much detail, you guys. Like, it was almost overwhelming, the level of like microbiology that she was talking about. But basically she shared what I already understood, which was estrogen from soy is actually a phytoestrogen. It is a plant estrogen, right? And actually it can have a protective effect against breast cancer. And we know this to be true if you've spent any time on Dr. Greger's website, nutritionfacts.org. He talks about this and teaches this very succinctly. But basically, this idea of soy having a feminizing effect on men was in a certain case study found to be true, because get this man was consuming, I might get this number wrong, it was maybe 12 servings or more of soy milk a day. And so he did experience some feminizing effect to his body, and therefore there has been more studies that she shared very eloquently with us. Basically, the conclusion was soy is fine. It's even beneficial, especially for women that are at high risk for breast cancer, or who have a family history of it, or who are currently facing breast cancer or surviving after the fact. 3 servings or less is perfectly safe. It's when we get to 5 servings or more that we start to see some problems, not only with actually increasing the risk of cancer, but also increased risk of that feminizing effect on men. So she said a solid 3 servings or less is totally safe to include in your diet, okay? So there's the soy myth for you. All right, calcium was one that she talked about. I think the statement that she shared was something about how calcium in milk helps build strong bones. And of course, again, if you've been in this space for very long, you and I both know that that is not true. But she did a really great job of going into detail of why that is. She talked about how foods that are high in protein that also have calcium in them, so for example, cow's milk, high protein foods will actually cause your body to excrete calcium into your urine. So when you drink cow's milk for the purpose of getting calcium, it's quite likely that your body is not actually even absorbing or using that calcium, but it is simply dumping it. So consider the fact that normal to low protein foods like whole food plant-based options can be much better options to meet calcium needs. She went into great detail also of how the daily recommended amount in the United States for calcium is much astronomically higher than it is in other countries. So she really kind of brought up this idea that, you know, nutrition is relatively a new science, and it may very well be that we don't know the answer of how much calcium we need as humans, because it is just all over the place if you look at the other countries and their recommendations for calcium amounts. She did say that in the plant-based world, if you are looking for good sources of calcium that your body will be able to absorb really well, I believe that one of the top contenders for that was bok choy. Kale is up there. Basically, leafy greens are just really fantastic, with the exception of spinach. Spinach has a high level of oxalates in it that actually makes the calcium not absorbable. So that was food for thought. So maybe don't put quite as much credence into your spinach intake if you're really focused on making sure you have calcium. Okay, so that's the calcium one. Okay, she went into agave. The statement that she put up on the board was something about agave being a healthy, low glycemic sweetener and all of those things. And of course, that was the one question that the room that I was in with all of these 250 people that attended the symposium, that was the one that I think stumped people the most. So it was really awesome to see her teach this. The fact that agave is in fact not a healthy sweetener. She compared it to high fructose corn syrup. If you looked at the amount of fructose in high fructose corn syrup, you're looking at around 50% of it is fructose. But did you know that most agave syrups on the market, even the ones that say organic and all these things, are 95 to 99% fructose? Okay, that was what she shared with us. And now I have not looked into this to research this myself, but that was what she shared. And that was pretty staggering, okay? Because if you learned anything about, you know, clean eating and whole foods, we know that we want to avoid these highly refined, highly artificial sweeteners like high fructose corn syrup. So to hear that this sweetener that's touted as a health food, that it is even worse than high fructose corn syrup, is pretty compelling and pretty surprising, really. So if you want tips on what sweeteners to use, again, feel free to reach out to me. That's beyond the scope of this video, but that blew me away. I did not realize that the numbers were quite there. I kind of knew that agave wasn't like all it was said to be, but wow, I'm staying away from agave from now on, guys. All right, let's see. One more that I'll go to from her talk was her statement about coconut oil. This one was also a little divided, but most of the people in that space knew what maybe you and I know, which is the more processed the food is, the more problematic it is, right? So when you're talking about any kind of oil, oil is oil in my mind. It's concentrated calories, it's 100% fat, it's highly refined, it has very, very little to no nutritional value, and it's a concentrated source of calories that isn't going to touch the stretch receptors on your stomach. So oils are really to blame for a lot of excess weight gain and overeating for many reasons. But that's just a little bit of that. Of course, it's not true that coconut oil is a health food and that it's heart healthy or anything. And what blew me away as she was talking about coconut oil is she threw this graph up on the screen of looking at the saturated fat content of coconut oil compared to olive oil compared to canola oil, and then it was even compared to beef and chicken and turkey and all of these things. And you know what? Saturated fat in coconut oil was in higher levels in the coconut oil than it is in those other foods. And we usually look to animal products and say, yeah, that, it's so high in saturated fat, we want to stay away from that. But really, it does make sense because you do know that coconut is one of the few plants in the plant kingdom that does have saturated fat. So when you take coconut and you refine it down into coconut oil, which is any kind of oil, is 100% fat, right? So it does make sense that it is a highly concentrated source of saturated fat now. So really something to think about if you are still using oils. I use oil in extreme moderation, and coconut oil is now pretty much off the table for me because of seeing those numbers. It was very compelling. All right, the last thing I want to share with you from Dr. Bansal's talk was she talked about two aspects of weight loss. The first one, she talked about timing of our calories and our food intake, and she talked about the type of calories and the type of foods that we're taking in. And so those of you that are looking into adopting a whole food plant-based lifestyle for losing weight, you might find this particularly interesting. And of course, I work with a lot of people in my health coaching practice that is of prime importance to them, that they do see themselves start to shed weight is their hope and their goal. So I really enjoyed hearing what Dr. Bansal had to say about this. So first of all, there is a lot of stuff out there right now about intermittent fasting, and it has been shown to be beneficial for weight loss. However, it is also being shown that the timing and where you choose to place the meals that you are eating when you are doing intermittent fasting is really important. So she shared this really simple kind of rule of thumb based on some studies that she shared, that basically we want to concentrate most of our calories into the morning rather than the evening. Okay, so if you've been doing intermittent fasting and you've been fasting through breakfast, you might start to reconsider this if you were to look into some of the studies that she cited behind this. And in fact, Dr. Greger has a book. I don't know if it's out yet, but if it's not, it's coming out soon, called How Not to Diet. And I've heard him do a couple interviews on podcasts where he talks about, as he's reviewed the studies in the literature, about effective intermittent fasting and effective weight loss timing of eating. It has been shown that it is best if you eat most of your calories in the earlier part of the day and have a smaller meal in the evenings. So in fact, I liked the little saying that Shipra shared. She said, you can eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. Okay, so if weight loss is really something that you're looking into, maybe that's something to experiment with for yourself, of concentrating more of your calories in the beginning of the day. The reason for this that she cited was the circadian rhythm of our bodies, that the more calories we consume earlier in the day, we are more likely, our metabolism is more awake, and of course we're having more activity throughout the day, so we are more likely to use the energy from those calories that we consume, which is not the case if you are eating a huge dinner or if you are eating and snacking late into the night. Because of course we go to bed in the evenings eventually, and then we're just laying there dormant, and those calories are most likely to be turned into stored fat. All right, so I thought that was really interesting, really helpful. There's a lot of buzz about intermittent fasting and timing your meals, so I thought that was extremely relevant for us today. Okay, the other thing that she shared was really great, just about some basic principles about the type of calories we want to be consuming if we want to have a really healthy weight management for ourselves. So she talked about 4 things. She talked about insulin spikes, she talked about ghrelin and leptin, which those are the hunger and the satiety hormones that our brain will release. And then she talked about fiber. So I'm going to go through these 4 things with you guys. So one of the reasons sometimes we will overeat is because we choose types of foods that spike our insulin abnormally, right? And this is especially true if you are hanging out in the processed sugary food world. And if you've had any sort of self-awareness, you've experienced this, right? That you have something, it really spikes your blood sugar, it really gets you buzzing. And then there is a crash, right? You have this low after, and it almost creates this vacuum that we then get into this cycle of wanting to continue to turn to food to get that energy up again. Now, her suggestion for this of the type of foods we can eat to avoid that insulin spike and avoid that cycle of just going back to these sugary foods is really to focus on consuming whole foods, plant foods, and especially what we would refer to as complex carbohydrates. So when you're thinking about getting full, we want to look at those foods that are high in carbohydrates, like fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes. And if we eat them in their whole natural state, they are going to be very satiating and they do not raise your blood sugar. The only whole fruits that you should really be avoiding if you are wanting to not spike your blood sugar is like pineapple and then juices, right? But that's not a whole fruit. So we don't really need to stress about creating that cycle as long as we are staying in that whole natural food realm. Okay, so I thought that was a really great thing that she pointed out there, that if we can just focus on the type of calorie we're taking in, that it is a whole food, and if we are eating carbs, that it is a complex carbohydrate, right? Okay. So the hormones she talked about. So ghrelin is the hunger hormone, okay? It's a hormone that our brain releases when it's hungry, when it knows it needs more energy. And of course, we get energy from calories from our food. So she talked about how ghrelin is somewhat connected to the stretch receptors on our stomach. So when our stomach begins to stretch, that is the signal, it sends a signal to our brain to stop producing the hunger hormone. Okay, so she talked about, okay, how can we use that to our advantage if we're trying to have really good weight management? And she turned to this idea of fiber, okay? Now, if you've heard me talk before, you know that I teach this openly, and this was an aha moment for me when I first learned it several years ago, that fiber only exists in the plant kingdom. Okay, so if you are eating highly processed packaged foods also, much of the fiber has been stripped away. And if you're eating a lot of meat, dairy, and eggs, that also has zero, by definition, since none of those things came from the plant kingdom, zero fiber in those foods. Okay, so the idea with fiber is that the fiber creates the bulk of the food that we are eating. It's the mass, right? It's the stuff that our body can't even break down and use, but it moves through our system, and we do need it as humans in high amounts, actually. So when we focus on eating whole plant foods, we are getting a really great amount of fiber, which is going to inherently put more bulk into our stomach with each meal, and thereby trigger that ghrelin to tell us that, hey, we're full, we're good. So if you haven't thought about that before, that's something to think about. Okay, leptin is our satiety hormone, the hormone that tells us, okay, we are satiated, we are satisfied, we're good. This was really exciting to hear her talk about. She taught that, and I'm sorry I don't have any studies to cite here, but she did. I couldn't write quite fast enough. But she talked about how high fat in our diet actually can disrupt leptin. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Having a lot of fat in your diet will disrupt leptin, the satiety hormone, the hormone that tells you that you are full. It disrupts that program. So again, if you are looking to create better weight management, to shed some excess weight, really consider bringing those fats down, okay? Naturally, if you are eating, whole foods from the plant kingdom, you're not eating oils, okay? And if you are, it's extremely sparingly. So the more we can get the oils out, the more we can start trusting our hunger and our satiety. Okay, so that's really something to think about. All right, one last thing that she talked about with fiber was that there have been studies that have been shown that people that have higher fiber content in their diets, that is associated with less depression. So that was very interesting. I hadn't ever heard that correlation before. So there's some food for thought. Okay, I am going to do a separate video, because this one is getting kind of long, on the amazing Zach Bush. He blew our minds, you guys, at the symposium. He really did bring plant-based nutrition to a whole new level, and just bringing it into the big picture. And then I would also, along with his remarks and his main points I want to share with you, Keegan Coons was one of the other speakers, so that'll be in the next video. Of course, Keegan Coon is one of the producers of the film Cowspiracy, as well as What the Health, and had lots to teach us and share with us as far as the environmental impact of our food choices. So watch for that next video. Thanks so much.